Okay, good morning, everyone. It looks like we're ready to begin. I'd like to first begin by welcoming everyone here to be part of this panel discussion. I'd like to thank my colleague, Letitia Sparks, for doing the hard work of helping set this up. A number of school districts had reached out and wanted to have a discussion about virtual academies. So I think we're up to right now 78 people involved. So the number's still going up. So we're excited. I'll begin first by introducing our panelists. Uh, Mr. Tom Cochran, Superintendent of Johnson County Schools, and Mr. Robert Yantz, the Director of Johnson County's Eagle Academy, established in 2017, serving 5 through 12 with an enrollment of 120 students. The Eagle Academy's vision is to provide learning without boundaries. Our why is to provide access to viable curriculum offerings for disadvantaged students to enable them to be connected to the public school and work toward becoming productive members of the local community while becoming life ready. Thank you again, Tom and Robert, for being part of this discussion. Next, I have Ms. Deneen Sargent, the Director of Rowan County of Virtual Education, Rowan Academy of Virtual Education, established in 2015, serving Rowan County, as well as surrounding counties, students in grades 6 through 12 with a current enrollment of 10 students. Rave's mission is to provide an education platform for students who are in extenuating circumstances, making it difficult and oftentimes impossible to attend school in a traditional setting. Again, thank you, Deneen and Rave Academy, for being part of this. Next, I have Mr. Philip Napier, one of the directors of Bavel, which was established in 2004, currently serves students in Barron County and across the state, grades 6 through 12, with an enrollment of 300 students, which account for nearly 2,800 individual course enrollments. Bavel's mission is to provide a meaningful and challenging learning environment outside the walls of the traditional school, public school. With us also, and again, Philip, thank you, sir, for being here. We also have from KDE, Dr. Marty Park, who is the Department of Education's Chief Digital Officer. He is focused on ensuring that all Kentucky public schools have digital opportunities and resources to meet the needs in all classrooms, including virtual academies. Also joining us as a digital learning coach, Mr. Ben Maynard. He supports Kentucky schools and district staff in adding digital leadership to their skill set and serves as support to online virtual schools across the state. I've relied heavily on KDE for their guidance as well, and I know our districts have. And guys, at this time, I think we need to go ahead and move forward. And the first thing I have on my list is topic number 1. We've broken this down into 3 topics. Number 1, attendance and funding. Number 2, policies and procedures. And 3, curriculum, teaching and learning. Each of these folks will have 5 minutes to speak about this topic, and then we'll have time for questions from our group. Beginning first with the Rave Academy, Deneen on attendance and funding.
Well, good morning. First, I would like to say thank you, Letitia and Andy, for allowing us this opportunity to get together to discuss what we already have going in our districts and to give some information for those who are interested in building a virtual academy. For Rave, as you heard, we are very small right now. We are 10 students. The most I've ever had in Rave were 32 kids, and we were established in 2015. Our academy is maybe a little different than the others in that my students work independently, and so my credit and attendance is based on performance. Those courses are coded in your Infinite Campus as performance-based courses, where credit at the end of the year or grades at the end of the year establish that ADA, so to speak, for your SAR report. As far as funding, when we first began Rave, we did have our applicants deposit a $300 deposit for the Rave program. Just a little bit of skin in the game. And once students completed their courses at the end of the program. One time $300, we refunded that $300 to them. It is probably against the popular demand on that, but we saw that many students, that $300 meant a lot to them. And when kids were maybe slacking off a little bit, and we would have those meetings with them, they would then tell us, I've cost my family $300 if I don't get this work completed. And we know that students have many extenuating circumstances where they need a program like Rave or any of the other academies represented here today. But we found that just having that little bit of a charge up front really did help to hold students more accountable. So that's pretty much the way our funding and attendance works in Rave.
Philip?
Sure. Thank you so much. And again, we appreciate the opportunity to talk to you all today. And as previously mentioned, my name is Philip Napier, and I'm one of the directors of BAVL in Barron County. And much like the Rave Academy, our funding is set up on a performance-based virtual model. So we don't receive any funding unless the student successfully completes their coursework. And we have found over the years that skin in the game factor really helps to motivate those students. And we get a lot of pushback for that. Well, this is a public education. Why am I having to pay this fee? But again, there's that whole understanding of we don't get funding unless the student successfully completes the course. So there needs to be some investment on your part to know that you're going to successfully complete that. We are set up as an A5 school in our district. So that keeps us separate from many of the other schools in Barron County. When we think about our course completion model and how all the attendance piece works, because we are set up performance-based, again, that attendance is factored in with the SAR based on student completion of courses. We've functioned on year-round enrollments where there really weren't defined dates for when students started and ended their courses. But we've found over the years that our students are more successful when there is that defined time frame for them completing their coursework. And I may make a few comments more about this later because we hear a lot of this work at your own pace. And obviously with virtual, I kind of compare that to I can work in my pajamas at home, right? But there are some firm expectations that we have to put in place to help our students successfully complete those courses in that timely fashion. And part of that goes back to as well our NCAA accreditation and the amount of time that students have to spend in a course. And so over the years, we've kind of fine-tuned that model as far as the amount of time that students are taking to complete their coursework. So much like Rave, our funding is set up on that virtual performance-based model and attendance being factored in that same way.
Thank you, Philip. Tom?
Thank you, Mr. Dawson. Just to give a brief overview of our Eagle Academy, we started in 2017 and we learned a great deal from both Rave and BAVL. We talked to both of those. And so our foundational ideas in our Eagle Academy virtual program is very similar and based largely upon both of those programs. Just to begin, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Yance, we began looking at the virtual program in full transparency because we were seeing a large number of our students who were shifting from public school to homeschool setting for a variety of reasons. Some legitimate reasons, some maybe to stay out of trouble with the public school system. And so we dove into this idea of a virtual option for that reason. But since then, we've really evolved into truly trying to meet the needs of every individual student who attends Johnson County schools, whether it's a student who's the main caregiver at home and has to work during the day, or whether it's maybe a young mother trying to finish her school. And so we have evolved and very proud of our program. With that being said, for topic one, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Johnson. Mr. Johnson is the director of a program who takes care of the daily activities and overall goals of it. So thank you, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Cochran. Also, thank you, KEDC and everyone for giving us this opportunity to come and talk to you today. Like Mr. Cochran said, we did start in 2017. And as far as our attendance and funding goes, whenever we originally started, we did have our students all coded at their home school, and we just set up virtual courses, performance-based for those students. At that point, it was only grades 9 through 12, so they were all housed at the high school still. Since then, we've transitioned. Our high school students 9 through 12 are now in our A5 school, the Eagle Academy. It also houses our alternative program. But they're still in a performance-based classroom, so it's still based on performance, just like the other two said, that we get our funding whenever they complete their coursework at the end of the year. Unlike the other panelists, we don't charge an upfront fee for our students currently. We really threw that around a lot in the beginning, and we just decided not to charge that fee, and with hopes that the program would be successful enough to where that we could recoup our money from our SEEK funding and things of that nature. For the funding portion of it, we use the Acellus program as our learning platform, and we're able to fund that through our ESS program, because we also use it for our credit recovery program, and we use it for several other things in our school. So we're able to afford enough licenses to cover our seats that we use in the Eagle Academy through that funding source. The staffing, I use staff at the other schools to tie the students to. So if a student has questions or anything like that, have grade level staff across the district and content area staff at the high school that are given time during the day, a set time during the day, whenever those students can contact them with their questions, or at the same time, those teachers are the ones that take care of monitoring those students and making sure that they are logging in regularly and are completing their assignments as they're supposed to. As far as time in the program goes, we do require that a student, whenever they transition to our program or apply to the Eagle Academy virtual program, that they do that for the remainder of the academic term, so that they can transition at the natural breaks if they so choose to transition back to our high school learning program. Currently, students under the 9th grade are still tracked at their home school, and we do set those up in a virtual performance-based classroom. There's a guidance from KED on how to do that, or if anybody has any questions about how to do that, they can contact me and I can walk you through it. It's not really that difficult after you learn it, but on the front end, it seems kind of overwhelming. But they are tracked in a performance-based classroom, and attendance is calculated on the completion of that course.
Thank you, Robert. Next is our colleagues from KDE. So I'll turn it over to them.
Thank you so much. Again, I do want to start by saying thank you to KEDC leadership for pulling this together. This is extremely timely. And as I shared with our panelists before we started, that for us at KDE and all of the leadership across the state, specifically in our online and virtual school space, this for us is a front row seat to learn from our team members, but also from others as we move forward. So, this question about from an attendance and funding perspective is absolutely vital. I do want to start by kind of throwing out some data, because I think that's a great place to start and build some evidence for what we're doing moving forward, especially for our attendees who are in the design thinking phase. So across the state, we have many school districts, I'm going to share some numbers here, but who have even pre-pandemic, pre-COVID, had structures in place that help us learn how to move forward in smart ways. And now, post-pandemic, or as we're getting to that tail end and designing for the 21-22 school year, it becomes important from a design thinking perspective of what's right for us. So as I share some of this data, be thinking about, as attendees and as leaders, be thinking about the fact that there are many similarities across our state and across district by district. There are similarities, but everyone, almost every district that we've worked with, from district leadership teams, and that's superintendents, assistant superintendents, curriculum leaders, ed tech leaders, DPPs, there are customizations and big ideas that everyone is going at in a little bit different way. So there's some similarities, but there are also some extreme customizations that everybody's after. So pre-COVID, 143 of our school districts offered virtual courses to students. So that's 84% of our school districts across the state. And if that's you, then that's awesome. And you have a base by which to expand. Mostly supplemental courses. There are definitely some course acceleration work that's been going on for quite some time. And there's also some catch up, that recovery course approach. I really try to, I would love to eradicate the term credit recovery, and I hope everyone is with me on that, but there's those situations as well. So as of August 2020, so as we were in middle of pandemic, of the 143 school districts, 38 of our public school districts in Kentucky offered what we refer to as expanded enrollment, meaning that they permit non-resident students to take courses or enroll in their virtual school experience. Now, that's either through reciprocal agreements. And so 26 of the 38 have reciprocal agreements with other school districts. 3 districts only offer a fee-based system. And then 9 of the 38 public school districts have kind of a both agreement or both opportunity where there's reciprocal agreements. And again, that's sharing the funding with the host district and the district that has non-resident students. So I think that's really important as we move forward in terms of attendance and funding. And of the 38 school districts right now, we have about an 80%, and it's a bit estimated, of non-resident student courses are full-time enrolled. And so I want to point that out pretty clearly, that there's a full-time enrolled experience, and then there is this part-time experience, picking courses up here and there when needed. And it's vital to understand what your approach is going to be. Are we going to be only full-time enrolled? So Bavel, for example, and thank you, Philip, for sharing your leadership over the last 15 years, by the way. But you have opportunities for full-time enrollment, and you have opportunities for supplemental or part-time pickup, as does most of our other districts that have shared, Johnson County and others. So that's awesome for us to understand, to be thinking about that as we move forward. We believe right now that in terms of attendance, we know there are 2 paths, and both paths are helpful. One is, as shared, the performance-based path, which is a post hoc funding mechanism, meaning pass the course and funding comes to district. Don't complete the course or fail the course and funding does not come to the district. So if you're designing on that, that's always been an option, and that will continue to be an option. That's awesome, especially if you're thinking about hybrid situations where students may, for all the right reasons, come in person in a brick and mortar one of your schools, and then also take virtual courses part of the day. So that performance-based mechanism works, has always worked, will always be there. It's always going to be an option for you. I shouldn't say always, but the new option that I want to share, and Ben Maynard, I'm going to take this topic and then we're going to share the other 2 topics as we move forward. But Ben Maynard will post in the chat he'll have to, we'll get you these links of resources, because I think they're important. We just announced last week and then shared yesterday on a superintendent's webcast a new waiver process. And this waiver, there's a lot of details, and we'll reference them and mention them. But this waiver process will allow you, if you apply and permitted, this is a KBE, a Kentucky Board of Ed waiver, to receive traditional attendance, so seat time based attendance, for the grade bands by which you apply for. In other words, you get attendance just like you get attendance for students in person. This is very important. Now, districts, when you apply, you will agree to some assurances. We'll talk about those assurances in a bit in the next topic, but it's important to understand that the waiver is for seat time attendance. It is not a waiver for performance-based Again, if you're only doing performance-based structures, you do not need a waiver for anything. You also are not required to have a virtual option. And that's very important. We've been asked this question over the last couple of weeks. Some districts were under the understanding that they were going to be forced to have a virtual option for students. That is not the case. We definitely do not want folks to start a virtual option unless they're all in on why they need a virtual option for some students. The final thing I'll say, and then I'll turn it back, and I hope I haven't gone over my time limit, but this waiver becomes very important because as of today, and we do have our first district submitting application, but until they get approved by the Kentucky Board of Education, as of today, there is no option for full-time enrolled virtual school students for students K through 4. I want to be clear about that. In law, there is no option for full-time enrolled virtual students K through 4 in the 21-22 school year and beyond currently. We'll be working on that law and that legislation to make that an option. But because performance-based options are by law only options for 5 through 12, we had to come up with a way based on working with superintendents and district leaders to work through a full-time enrolled virtual experience for K through 4 students for the right students at the right time, right? Not all students that aren't good fits, and we'll talk about that on topic 2 and topic 3, but making that option available. So I hope that kind of moves on that topic, and I'll pass it back.
You're on mute, Andy.
Okay, Ben, do you have anything you want to add?
No, man, you don't want me chewing up 5 more minutes too. We'll keep on pace. I'm going to do good and try to mind my manners.
All right. Again, KEDC, number one, is a great organization for me to work with, but they helped set this up. And I do appreciate the support, Nancy and Trish and the entire team here at KEDC for bringing this together. We know superintendents and school districts and parents and students are all looking at virtual in so many different ways. The only thing I had in questioning was from looking at the chat at this point is school codes. Maybe Marty, Ben, you guys could talk to this. Who do they go to if they have a request, start the virtual academy and that kind of process?
Ben, you take that.
And I'm going to try to find the direct link for you, but most of our, if not all of, and as Philip mentioned, are A5 programs. And several of you in the chat have mentioned pursuing the waiver. One of the questions in the waiver is, where's this going to be? Is this going to be part of an A1? Just to be very honest, like our first submission is talking about what we would refer to as an academy, like a school within a school. But if you need to spin up a new A5, your contacts for that, we're looped in with, I get emails frequently from Rodney Bennett and the Office of, I think that's Finance and Operations, correct, Marty? And so your DPP, likely, here's where your DPP knows that process, but I'm going to find that link and drop that in the chat for you just in case you want it to look through at this minute. But if you need to spin up a new A5 program, that would be, there's a guidance document that I'll also post as part of the resources so that you have that. And here is a question, and just to be 100% frank, that I don't totally know the answer to. Some districts have decided to kind of rebrand a current A5. And so I know districts who have went through that process to rename an existing A5 if you want to do that. And so I think it's probably better to do that than to not if you have any questions. But I will post those links in the chat for you guys.
I also have a question on for our panelists on reviewing fees, the fees that you charge and so forth. So anybody like to speak on that?
Sure, I'll start with that. Our fee was just $300 one time. So if a student when we began, we only started with 9 through 12 in 2015. And the year after, we incorporated 6 through 8. So we are now 6 through 12. But it was a one-time $300 fee. So if I enrolled as a 6th grader, I paid $300 one time. Upon completion of the program, either I decide to not re-enroll, because mine is an A1, so we are a program within our school. The middle school students are still part of Rowan County Middle School. The high school students are still part of Rowan County Senior High School. So once I completed the program, or I decide to come back in person and walk the halls of our building every day, then I get that $300 back. And that's how our program began.
Okay, great. Anybody else? Philip?
I'll add to that. I guess one thing that I want to reiterate about our fees is that they are refundable. Okay, so when students invest what we charge of a $50 deposit per course, that fee is refundable if they successfully complete those courses. So if a student is taking 5 classes, then they'll pay the $50 deposit for each of the 5 classes. If they're taking 6, they'll do the same. One thing to keep in mind with those deposits is, if that's the mechanism that you're going to use, you've got to make sure you have somebody in a system to track those, right? I think that, when we are considering that money flowing in and out of our program, we've got to make sure that that's attached to and is following that student as they transition. And those deposits roll over from year to year. So a student is not paying that $50 deposit every single year. Much like with Rave, if they exit our program, if they're going back to that traditional school, that's when we issue the deposit. If they are remaining with us, then we just roll that deposit over from year to year.
Great. I also have a question on here. Do you submit a separate calendar for your virtual school? And if so, does it have to be board approved?
We do not, because our students are, again, just housed. They are in our A1 schools.
Thank you for answering that question that way, because I was actually feverishly typing into the QA box. It really depends on if you are structuring your full-time enrolled or part-time enrolled virtual school experience, or virtual experience, I should say, as a school, program, or academy, as Ben said. So again, we refer to academy based on all of our districts across the state who've been leading in this space as a school within a school. And so a great answer there. If it's a program, specifically meaning an A5 classified, or it's classified as an A5 program, then yes, there would be a separate calendar, and you would go through the same policies, processes, and procedures that you have with all special programs or all programs in your school district.
Fantastic. Any other comments? If not, we'll move on to our next topic, policies and procedures. And Philip, would you start that out for us?
Absolutely. One of the things that we have learned through our experience over the years is, from the very moment that a student starts looking into online options, we want to be involved in that process. Because if we can start developing those relationships with our students and our parents from that first moment, then it certainly helps us if they do, in fact, enroll with us. We already have that communication that is going back and forth. A lot of times when students first inquire about enrolling in online, and we share with them about our program, we share with them about our expectations, that's their first chance that they can throw their hands up and say, this is not for me. Mm-hmm. And I think that sets virtual programs aside, because I think there are times when students are just immediately placed into virtual courses because that's what they think they want to do. But we have definitely built a process for guiding students through numerous conversations, numerous maybe tasks that they are completed before they ever get into a virtual course with us. So the very first thing that our students complete when they are looking to enroll with us is a questionnaire that we have posted on our website. Part of that is checking to see that student's ability to navigate and maneuver in a web-based situation. You know, if students can't follow simple directions on just our Babel website to fill out a student questionnaire, then that's our first point of conversation if we ever talk with them. Well, share with me what you struggled with in just completing the student questionnaire. Once they complete that, they submit the necessary documentation, then they talk with our director of admissions, and that is Janelle McGuire. Over the years, our administrative roles have evolved, and as our numbers have continued to grow, we definitely saw a need to identify a specific individual that is following those students in that process. And so after they've completed the student questionnaire, they filled out the documentation, they have an actual one-on-one conversation with Ms. McGuire. And during that conversation, that's a great time for Ms. McGuire to just introduce them to our staff, for us to get to know our students, for us to get to know those parents, and the specific situation that's bringing them to choose online as an option. And, you know, sometimes in that conversation, we try to avoid the whole bandwagon effect. Well, my friend's doing virtual, so I'm going to do virtual. Well, no, let's get to the bottom of the true reason why you feel like virtual is what you are seeking. Because I think we all have to understand virtual is a great option, but it's not an option for everyone. Not everyone has the characteristics to be a successful online student. There has to be a level of self-discipline, self-motivation, time management skills, just being able to get up in the morning, have a routine to log in and work on your courses. And you know, that's part of the conversation that we have with those students when they are enrolling with us. Now, we do have certain restrictions, requirements for students when they are enrolling with us. We do require that students have a 2.0 GPA and that they are passing 3/4 of their courses. In addition to that, they are meeting all, if they are out of district students, they are meeting all the requirements that our traditional out of district requirement and that contract that they signed, that they are meeting all of those. So we have to keep all of those things in mind. In our topics of conversation that we were sent, you know, there was a question about our special education population and how all of that works. And I don't deal with that specifically here in our office, but to share with you kind of how we handle those specific cases. We work directly with our director of special programs for Barron County Schools and our teacher consultants to look at those specific situations. And I think a lot of it comes back to the certain accommodations, the services that those students are required to receive. And you have to look at, is this going to be the most conducive environment to meet those accommodations? Now, there are lots of questions and how all of that works, but I think a great place to start is looking at those specific accommodations and working with your director of special programs and teacher consultants in your district to see if those needs can be met in that virtual setting. One of our big conversations, as certainly the pandemic has brought about, you know, students transitioning to a virtual environment just out of necessity in their situations. We have to think about that transition from virtual to in-person, and then from in-person to virtual, and how all of that works. You know, with the setup of our courses, and this can be different from program to program, it's difficult for a student to transition in the middle of a semester. So typically when students are transitioning from a traditional school to another traditional school, there's a little bit more ease in dropping a student into a course mid-semester. While we do have the tools to modify our courses somewhat, we require, if students are transitioning at any point, to start back from the beginning of a segment of their course. I think for our teachers and for our model, that's what we found has been most successful in those transitions. And so you have to think through those things as you are planning your program. Am I going to allow students to transition in the middle of the semester? And if I am going to allow that, what are the modifications that I'm going to have to make to that online course to make that work? And so kind of going back to a comment that I made about attendance and our funding, because we now function on that traditional school calendar, so from August to May, we have defined dates that we've put in place for our enrollments to cut off for the semester. Because as we've learned the dynamic of our courses and how those are set up, knowing, okay, so this is the point in the semester where it's going to be very difficult for you to start from the beginning of the segment and complete that. So we've worked with our team to establish those guidelines. But I think it's very important for us, as we've worked with other school districts, as we work with schools within our district, to have those conversations with those counselors, because ultimately, we would like to see students start with us and complete with us and participate in our graduation ceremony. But we know that there are students that just need virtual for a period of time. Now, for Babel, we're not the right fit for home hospital or temporary placements in virtual. We're looking for something that's a little bit more long-term. So a semester long or a year long is really how our program functions best. But you have to think through those details as you are developing what you plan for your district. So I think I'm getting close to my cutoff time, and there's a lot that I could say about this. And I know that everybody, as we've experienced at the different program levels, kind of have those different perspectives of how that would work for us.
Thank you, Philip. Robert?
Yeah, as far as from our policies and procedure standpoint, I really like the way that Philip introduced his, because that original process of introducing the students to our virtual program is about building those relationships with that student and making them understand that there is a great deal of self-motivation that goes into completing the virtual coursework, and making sure that they understand that really, and I always use the term with them, is that the ball is in their court now. This is their responsibility once they take this on, and it's really all or nothing. I get all of my funding or I get nothing if you complete this course. So that's the same for you. You get all of the credit for it, or you get nothing if you don't complete the course. So there is that application process for them. And I think that is really important, to build that relationship with them initially, that the student does understand that they're entering into a contract with the Johnson County school system, that they will successfully complete all of their coursework that they enroll in for it. So we do require a pretty extensive application to start with, and anybody that comes to me that's interested in it, or that comes to anybody in our district that's interested in pursuing our virtual coursework, they will fill out this application, and it has several of those relationship building type questions in it. And like he said, there's a questionnaire to make sure that they are technologically savvy, that they can navigate through the program, and also that there's a motivation for them pursuing it, that they're not just trying to escape going to school, that they're not just trying to escape other things, but there has to be some sort of circumstance that warrants them pursuing a virtual education. So that they're required to complete that application, and then we require them to also sign a agreement with us. It's a contract type based agreement that the student would sign and their parents would sign, showing that they agree to do certain things throughout the semester. And it's not just about completing their work. They also have to agree that they'll meet with myself or another member of our team whenever we deem necessary, is the way that I worded it in that. They also have to agree to come and take any sort of assessment that might be required for them at their grade level. And they have to agree to maintain a pace in their coursework. Now, when I say maintain a pace, there's not really a set requirement of how much they have to do each day or anything like that. They are still allowed to work at their own pace, but we do monitor to make sure that they're working at a pace. So they have to agree to do all those things, and they're under the understanding before they leave the office that day, whenever we do set them up in the program, that if they fail at any of those things, they're going to fail the course. So the course is not just about completing the coursework and completing necessarily what you will do during that course, but it's also about meeting those other requirements of our program. And I think that really helps to drive home to those students that there's a responsibility on their part to make sure that this thing works. And it's a two-way street. So they have to work just as hard as I have to work to make sure that our program is successful. So in saying that, students who do prove unsuccessful during one educational term, we're not going to approve them for the next educational term to come back into our virtual program. So our students understand that, and we've had some that I've just had to refuse and tell them that you're not going to be able to continue in this because you're not meeting our expectations. And the kids do understand that once that we get that in there. Special education, we do extend this to some of our special education students. Of course, that has to be a placement that's made through a ARC meeting, because it is a change of placement for that student. And anytime that a student is placed, a special education student is placed, and I'm not going to say we have a whole lot of them, maybe 2 or 3, but those students understand that they are required to either come to campus or meet at some place a special education teacher to get their special education services. So all that's written into their IEP, and we make sure that they understand that there has to be that meeting with that teacher. And we've learned through the past year that we are able to do those on Google Meets and Zoom and different things like that. So we've been pretty good at getting those things taken care of. Among the people who have participated in the program, reception's been pretty good. Parents and students have been pleased with the flexibility, and the obstacles that we've noted have, of course, been the equipment and access to a reliable internet. We do live in rural America, so there's some of that still that exists. That tells me it's time to stop talking. But student motivation seems to be equal to those students who are in the regular learning environment. So a lot of my people will complain and say, well, the kids don't do anything whenever they get on virtual. And I'll look back at them and say, well, there's some of the kids that sit in your classroom that don't do anything too. So we struggle with the same things that they struggle with in the regular classroom. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Robert. That was good information. Marty, Ben?
Thank you so much. I'm gonna start off and then tee it up for Mr. Maynard to take over with some really, I think, strong points of emphasis. So all along the way, as I said earlier, we've learned from awesome district and school leaders across the state, specifically Rowan, Johnson, Barron County, and several others, in developing these 3 key resources that we really want to push folks towards. To get at the heart of policies and procedures, it's all about, we all can agree with this, it's all about students' progress towards learning. That's building and designing interactions with kids, that is looking at engagement, participation, again, all towards progress of learning with experiences or opportunities that they may not have in a traditional setting, or is not the right fit in a traditional setting. So all that's been mentioned so far, all of these policies and procedures are geared towards that. So 3 resources that Ben is going to reference. Number 1, the waiver application has 15 assurances. These are 15 things that were very intentional, whether it's a district that's going to submit the waiver application. Again, this is for seat time attendance, which is a higher bar, so to speak, and less flexible than the performance-based strategy, which is you don't need a waiver for. But I want to point to the 15, even if you're structuring or designing around performance-based, these 15 things were very intentional. And we view them as like architect plans for your policies and procedures. There are specific assurances that Mr. Jans just mentioned about, access. There's specific assurance around working with a student who has an IEP's ARC team to place in the right way, the right thing for the right kid at the right time. These 15 assurances can be used and should be used as great architect plans for your policies and procedures. Next is our Kentucky Digital Learning Guidelines. These digital learning guidelines, there are 5 big deal things that we refer to as guiding principles. They are in every superintendent's annual assurances. And these 5 things reference when we are going to engage with digital learning, and online and virtual enrollment is a part of that. So these 5 things are big deal things to kind of help you gauge and build your policies and procedures. And then the third thing are the resources that we put together and through pandemic response kind of launches, which is our 4 digital strategies. So Ben, take those 3 resources and tie those together for this question about structuring policies and procedures. As you are, and by the way, Ben Maynard, if you've not met Ben, he's awesome to work with. He's also helped pick up and help lead across the state to connect districts with each other who are designing these same things.
Thanks, Marty. So I love to hear districts talk about how they've constructed their policies and procedures, because there are certainly some guardrails and bumper lanes in this area. But with most things in Kentucky, some of this is, and that's what Marty mentioned, that extreme customization kind of in the beginning. That's where you guys have some room to operate inside those guardrails. And so to set those up to best meet the needs of your families and your stakeholders, I think is very much a key piece to this process. And honestly, when districts are in the design thinking mode, this is where they tend to like what is it Chris Berman used to say, bumble and stumble, fumble, bumble, stumble, toward the goal line, because they get tripped up in some of these, because you really have to back up. And Philip, I think you mentioned this earlier about the vision of your program, like what you need it to be, what you want it to be for your folks, for your students, and then how do we then structure our policies going forward. One of those, and you guys hit on so many things, like with special education, site-based policies and those things. One of the things that hasn't come out yet, it may come up with some questions, is like staffing requirements, right? I don't know that, and I can look at the faces of all 3 programs here, like your staffing model is probably similar, but has some nuances based upon the amount of students you have, what the target goals and vision of your program is. I know roughly like your staffing models, and I could almost quote, I'll give you a chance to maybe do that in a minute. But Marty referenced the Kentucky Digital Learning Guidelines. So I look at staffing like this, and this is a question that I get quite often in this area around requirements, policies, procedures. How do I set that up? And it's kind of a spectrum based upon your goal. Now, there is a minimum to that. If you look at the Kentucky Digital Learning Guidelines, which we have a slide deck, Letitia, that we can share with folks at some point. I don't know if you want to put that in the show notes or whatever it is, but we'll get that to everyone. If you've not seen those, they're on our KDE site. But in an online, these are assigned to content like certified teachers, and then depending on your level of I guess the number of students you have, the vision and goals for your program, then there's some layers of folks that you can put in there. Been talking with JCPS and their eSchool program, and they're handling thousands of kids in that program, internally and hundreds outside of the program. So how do you connect kids? So in your design thinking, how intentional do I need the interactions to be? And what you found out this year, leverage some of the stuff that you learned this year in terms of connections with my 5th graders are probably way different than connections with my sophomores. The frequency, and the target of those can be very different. And so when you start talking about specifics for grade levels in your program, and those of you pursuing the waiver and looking at K through 4, certainly the amount of staff that you can put in there in terms of access to content, certified folks, other mentors, and steward the learning and progress, and also communicate with families. Philip and Babel, I know you guys have done a great job of connecting with the SEL portion. We know that it's a huge component. And so districts are even kind of thinking through, how do we structure it so that we can have increased access to even school counselors and some of the folks to help in those social emotional pieces of learning that we know is important. So we'll have some links in terms of Kentucky Digital Learning Guidelines that will kind of give you that baseline, but then you can customize and build that and honestly, Marty, I could say this: programs that we feel like are that seem to be what we deem most successful, at least from their perspective, seem to have more folks tied to it. And we did, I wanted to reference this, and we're looking at this currently to see how this fits for next year. So I hope I'm not talking out of turn, but last year is part of the guidance that we did the 4 digital strategies, and then looking at online virtual learning, like class size. You know, how many folks, you know, like how many teachers can you tag someone with? You know, we have some guidance that we put out last year. We're reviewing that just to make sure, you know, that could be applicable for this year. But we would just, at a minimum, say, look at it as like your current brick and mortar building, like class size guidance. Start with that as your basis in terms of teachers.
All right, thank you, Ben. Let's move on to Deneen and go.
Okay. So much like, I think in the beginning, I failed to say that Rave, established in 2015, I know I said this to the panelists beforehand, but we kind of modeled our program after Babel in 2014. We did an actual visit and we got in a van and we drove out to Barron County, which is a long way from Moorhead. And we met with Philip and his team out there, and we modeled our application process much like Barron County did. One of the things that we saw is that we, in the beginning, had a hard time getting students to commit to the testing portion. So even though you're at home and you're working, and I probably should say that, Rave means that our students are at home all the time. They don't come in our building for any academic courses, okay? Now, that's what Rave is. We do have all of the other virtual models that Marty spoke to earlier, those enrichment courses and, you know, and the remediation courses and all of those things. So we had a problem with the testing and getting students to come in to do their state mandated testing. We had to tie that to their application process and that agreement, and that if you did not fulfill that agreement, then like Eagle Academy spoke about, you know, sometimes I would have to make you go back into the regular population. But we would allow you to appeal that process and give us all the reasons why you still need to stay virtual. Much like Johnson County said earlier, the need for Rave came about in that we saw a lot of students leaving our schools to go to homeschool for multiple various reasons. And that really started to hit home for us in that, yes, we recognize that students have extenuating circumstances and reasons why they cannot walk the halls of our buildings every day, but we have an obligation, a moral obligation, to still help to educate them. And then thinking outside the box, how can we still do that for students and their families? Once that application is received, we have a committee. It is not one person, it's a committee that reviews every single application. And as a committee, we will look to see if they are a good fit for Rave. If they are not a good fit for Rave, we help them to find what avenue would be best for them. Maybe it is coming into our building and doing some of those online courses in what we call our virtual learning lab. And so special education students, RTI plan students, ELL students, everyone is considered. And then if we feel like Rave is not the best fit, we will meet with the family and we will try to help them figure out what the best fit would be. We meet with our students and their families at the very beginning of every school year. We have a mandatory orientation. So we didn't do this in the beginning, and then we saw that we were just the people behind the camera or behind the email. And so that was something we learned along the way. It's very important for us to make those connections with our families in the beginning. Not only that they know who I am and who their teacher facilitator is, or their core content specialist that will hold office hours, but also they meet the principal of our building, the assistant principal, the guidance counselors. We sit down with them and build their accounts. Those are all things that we do in orientation. And no student can begin Rave courses until they've gone through the orientation. Either they do it the night that we set, or we set up a special time for that child and that family to come in and meet with us. So I talked a little bit about our content specialist. I am one director. We have one teacher facilitator, but I do have content specialists that we set up office hours where if you are having trouble in math, my facilitator will hook you up with the math teacher and you can meet with them in multiple ways. We've learned so much through the pandemic, and we can do just about every virtual platform made available to us now. In the future, so just to kind of, clarify, we are a totally performance-based program. Our district is looking to do the waiver, to do the synchronous application as well, but still we want to set ours up as an academy and not a totally different school. But I think the beauty in virtual academies is if you have a small population of students like I do, 10 to 30, 40 kids, you can do that and provide those opportunities to your kids. If you see there is a larger need, like a Babel or Johnson County, who have hundreds of students, you can do that as well. And I think that's the beauty in offering a virtual platform. I will go out and say that anything we can provide for our students, either virtually or in person, will go above and beyond most of what people consider traditional homeschool programs. We are the education specialists, and we need to do everything we can in our due diligence to educate our kids, for our communities, and for the future of Kentucky.
Thank you, Deneen. We do have some questions. Marty, I think we have a question directed toward a K through 4 curriculum. Can you answer that for us, please?
Yes, as I lead into that question, Deneen, we're going to copy that soundbite and share that widely. We believe that the product that we're putting out directly for students is awesome, and we also believe that with these structures, effectively, there's nothing we can't design on. I refer to it as the freedom to design. We have all of the structures currently today to do that. So the question, it leads into this point that I just made. For K through, specifically for K through 4 students, if a school district does not submit their local board approved waiver application to the Department of Education to then get approved by the Kentucky Board of Education, that was a whole lot there, then there is no option for K through 4 students. So just to be clear on that, if the waiver application is not submitted by the district, then you currently do not have a legal mechanism to do a full-time enrolled virtual option or experience for K through 4 students. When is it appropriate for K through 4 students is exactly the point of this. And again, thank you, KEDC, for structuring this. Is exactly the point in topics number 2 and topics number 3. That is for us as leaders and teachers and lead learners to help lay out when is it appropriate for K through 4 students. The 15 architect statements that I'll use, the 15 assurances, get directly at this. And specifically number 9 points to a question that Dr. Bobrowski asked, I think, and Deneen, you just nailed as well. In a performance-based structure, again, you don't need a waiver for that. In a performance-based structure, we see a lot of asynchronous, on-demand, at the student's self-paced work. We also know that can level up in really awesome ways, and Philip speaks to this quite a bit, with some synchronous opportunities mixed in there, right? So from a teaching and learning perspective, having live connection interactions with teachers and students as a learning component, and on-demand interactions with content and instructional design with the student put together helps in our teaching and learning scenarios. That's all great. We actually do this in person in our brick and mortar schools very well. However, you do not have to have synchronous components in your performance-based structures. If you're going to apply for the waiver, the number 9, the architect statement number 9, assurance in that waiver application gets directly to this, that you have to have synchronous components to be able to submit and assure in your application, if that makes sense. Number 5, assurance in that application gets directly to this idea about who's a good fit, who's the candidate. I wanted to point this out because this question was asked. Families must request to be enrolled. That students cannot be involuntarily placed. But the big deal is that when you set your enrollment procedures and practice policies up, you can identify, as Philip laid out earlier, you can identify who's a good fit. And if the student is not a good fit, then they don't have to be accepted into the program, right? We do not want to have students, that would be negligent to kids, right? We don't want to have students in a program that it's not a good fit. So thank you for that question, and thank you for passing that to us.
Thank you, Marty. I do have some other questions, but we're going to move to the third topic and answer then, because some of these questions are going to fall right into this third topic as well. The third topic of curriculum, teaching, and learning. We'll begin first with Robert.
Hit unmute there. Once again, thank you for letting us share today. And Marty, I want to thank you guys, especially for finally giving us a K4 option, if I could say it that way, because I think that there is a need in that area, and I think it's great that the state is progressing with that through this waiver application. It's been something that we are going to definitely explore, and I really appreciate that. As far as our curriculum and teaching and learning goes, and I know that there's a lot of the talk about synchronous and asynchronous, and I think that those things are a progression as you go along. And I appreciate, once again, with the K4 waiver process, them including that it has to include some sort of synchronous learning, because the younger that a child is, the more they need that structure, the more that they need that day-to-day interaction from the teacher. And as a student gets a little older, then you are able to move more toward a asynchronous model where they can work at their own pace. And a lot of our need in Johnson County, especially, were older students who were just disconnected from the public school system. Or, I've got a lot of kids who have to work, and a lot of the places here want them to work during the day. And that was impossible with them having to go to school during the day. But being able to offer them a curriculum that's outside that general structure gives them that time where that they can go to their job during the day and do my work at night. So just different things like that. And it provides that flexibility with the asynchronous learning. We do use the Acellus learning platform as our basis for our education. They're pretty good courses. It's not a one-size-fits-all by any means, and I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all out there. What we're looking into now for the future will probably be more of a menu approach, where we pull from several different places for those courses, so that the student can actually pick what's best for them, what fits their learning style the best. The formative assessments are built into Acellus, so it actually gives a test about every 20 lessons. And once the student takes that test, it will either place them back into a lesson where that they need more review, or it'll let them go on to the next topic. So those formative assessments are built into that program. It is a standalone program. If the student who is in that class never wants to have contact with the teacher, then they wouldn't have to. Of course, I do assign them to a content area teacher for each one of their classes. And those teachers are responsible for making sure that that student is doing work in the class. And the program sends the emails constantly letting us know if a student's struggling in a certain subject or whatever like that. So we can point that to that student and go contact that student and say, hey, it looks like you're having trouble in this. What can I do to help you with that? So they are tied to a content area specialist for that. The student population best suited for the virtual academy. And I'm going to say that varies from place to place. A lot of ours were really displaced students, students who, like I said, were having trouble figuring out how they were going to live their life and come to school. And then I have a lot of students who would have been otherwise homeschooled. if it hadn't been for us offering this option. And at this point, I'll say this, and I don't know how dangerous it is to talk about this, but we really use our program as a relationship building aspect for our community. It's extremely popular in our community, and there's a lot of parents who are disconnected and for whatever reason, and there's all kinds of reasons out there that they don't want to send their kids to public school. Well, we know that if they don't send their kid to public school, then the public school doesn't get any funding for that student who lives in our district. And the parents have that right. They have that right to choose. So actually, we have offered our curriculum to some homeschool parents and let them use our curriculum. And we know that that costs the district money. And we know that we're not getting any funding for that. But I've offered them access to the curriculum so that they can use it in their homeschool. And that way I can still maintain that relationship with them and still tie to them in some way. And then down the road, most of them, once they get to 5th grade or whenever, will transition into our virtual academy. And then, we'll be able to recoup that funding from them down the road. Like I said, for our future adjustments, we are looking at going more toward a menu approach to where there would be more of a synchronous element to some of our upper level classes, to where that those students would be responsible for turning something into an actual teacher on occasion. But that, like I said, that's a plan for the future. Right now, we just use the standalone Acellus program, and it's worked pretty good for us to this point. And that's where we're at right now.
Thank you, Robert. Good information there. Next is Ben and Marty. Do you have anything to add?
Oh, we've always got something, Andy. You know that. Thank you. So I appreciate you guys sharing. So the synchronous, asynchronous, and actually he also popped a question there. So I don't know if I'm supposed to be addressing questions of the same, but it relates to this conversation. So in terms of synchronous, asynchronous, Ashley, if you're doing the traditional, the thing we've always had access to, performance-based setup for 5 through 12, there's nowhere that says you have to have daily synchronous or weekly synchronous. You've heard both Denise and Philip, Robert all talk about, it could be very much self-paced, but they're connecting them to content, experts when needed, course stewards are contacting them regularly and using a variety of, tools, whether it's Meet, Teams, Zoom, whatever it may be, to be able to do that. Districts, though, that have now worked in this space for a while will tell you, and I hear this frequently, some scheduled routine, some kind of accountability piece, some kind of a synchronous, even small group or one-on-one just meet up on a Google Meet or something can be very productive for students and something to consider when building and you design it. And of course that starts to, point you toward how many people do I need and that kind of thing. And like Robert said, some of this, as you guys are looking at curriculum and products and platforms, that's always a topic of discussion here. And I always have to preface this by saying we can't recommend a curriculum provider to you. There's no state contract for such a thing. You guys found out this year, once you got a ton of CARES money, guess what happened? You were getting phone calls and emails from everybody that can sell you any kind of curriculum, right? And I think what you quickly found out was not all are created equal. And so one of the things that your superintendents are assuring to in the Kentucky Digital Learning Guidelines, that if you're adopting such a platform, you have a process inside the district to pretty much vet that, what we call vetting. You have teachers looking at it, you have content folks looking at it, determining what I call the gaps and cracks, and then how can we fill those in, so that we're meeting the Kentucky academic standards. And so I would tell you this, if you don't have a process for that, pretend you do and then develop one, right? And ask some questions of some folks that are on this call. I'm going to share some resources with you in this slide deck. There's things that we have available on our website, like instructional resource alignment rubrics. The model curriculum framework does a tremendous job. If you're looking at putting together curriculum, Robert, I like your answer of like, it's kind of like, we know this program does this well and this does this well, and we're going to try to put all of that together. And who's doing that? People are doing that. Your Kentucky certified teachers are doing that. And if you have that type of process, it's going to be hard to go wrong with that. And I'll mention this on assessment. I think what you guys found out this year, through our continuation of learning, it holds some similarities to a full-time online, enrolled program or academy, but it is different in some ways as well. And one of the things is your platform or your curriculum provider obviously has some assessments built into it. But I think you're going to find that if you refer back to the model curriculum framework, and if you start looking at as you develop your program in design mode here, if you look at your formative assessment cycles, there's going to be some things that you can develop in-house, make it part of your curriculum in order to, I think, continue to gather evidence as to where kids are, so you can speak to our kids are learning, they're learning at a high level. And I think that's what all of you want to be able to say about the experiences that your kids have in your programs. And I'll share those links. Marty, if you want to jump in with anything additional, I don't think I'm quite chewed up on time.
Just a challenge question for Mr. Maynard. Have you yet to find one packaged canned thing that our folks are purchasing that fills every need?
No. And I've heard there were stories people told me this year of, man, it was really economical, but it did not come close to what we really needed. And so they had to do a lot more work on the back end in terms of, using some of the existing pieces they created in district to kind of fill those areas. So I think if you use those, I think you'll find those.
Thank you. That's the secret sauce there, right? Is to take maybe some third-party things that you purchase or work with other districts on, and then take your local talent and add those superpowers to it. So thank you.
Next is Deneen.
Okay. So just to kind of piggyback on what everyone has said, in Rowan County this year, we purchased a new learning management system, and before we used a program called Waiver, and this year we used the program called Schools PLP. Now, Rave, which is Waiver platform prior, has learned a lot from Schools PLP and the implementation this year. Moving forward, in making sure that our Rave curriculum completely aligns with what our teachers are teaching in this building, we will adopt what our Schools PLP teachers did this year. And that was my content teachers in my building that I'm in right now met with our online platform facilitators, and every week they would outline the exact content that they are teaching in this building, so that we ensure that the kids who were online were still getting the same content. That was something that Rave has taken away from this process. So in the year of COVID, there are things that we have done now because of the pandemic that are going to continue to carry on. And that is definitely one of those things that we will do. Now, I'm not sure what learning management platform we will use. We haven't really nailed that down just yet, but if we go back to Waiver, we expect to continue that same process. Remembering my students are self-paced, we do have that check-in. There are unit deadlines built into the learning management system. I always tell my kids when they enroll in Rave, as long as you don't miss a deadline, you won't ever have to hear from me unless you want to. But man, once you miss a deadline, we're going to be all over you, making sure that we can put into place whatever resources you need to ensure that you are successful, because that's our job. We also have weekly progress reports. My teacher facilitators at both the middle school and the high school, every time that parent and that student are included on those weekly progress reports. I just have been receiving them today from my Rave facilitator as we've been in this meeting today. So the parent is always a crucial part. I tell the parent, we're not in the house with them. You or another adult are. We rely a lot on you to make sure that students are staying on task and staying on track with what they need to complete. So we do use the platforms mentioned before, Google Meet, Zoom. Before this year, back earlier in 15, 16, 17, we'd even use FaceTime. If you need to FaceTime me to do a lesson or to talk, we use whatever was available. For assessments, students are required, like I said, to come in the building to take state assessments, but their unit assessments that are in the learning management system, they do those just right at home as well. The student population best suited for the virtual academy, honestly, we will consider anyone. You have to have good work ethic. You have to have that support system at home, and you have to be able to commit the time to it. Doesn't have to be from 8 to 3, but you have to be able to commit time to it every day. My facilitator and I will set up a schedule with the kid where we design the hours of the day. You tell me what hours you are willing to commit. I'm not telling you the hours you have to commit, but you tell me what hours you are going to commit. And then, of course, in the learning management system, we can do that check. Did you log on from 7 to 9 p.m. last night like you told me you were going to? No, you didn't. So you might get that email saying, hey, let's make sure we're logging in, doing our work. You know, we're just excited about Rave. As little as it has been, we have seen so much success. Students who have graduated and received a diploma who honestly, without Rave, that would have not been a possibility. And so we're just looking forward to growing it in the future and seeing where it can go, along with this synchronous model that, you know, our district is going to put in place next year.
Thank you, Deneen. Philip?
So you've heard a lot of great perspectives, and there are a lot of things that I could repeat that Bavel does, but I've made a notes on just a few things that I want to emphasize to kind of add to this conversation. And the first thing for us that we have always made a top priority is that when a student is taking a specific course, that they have a content area certified teacher that is monitoring that progress and is there as the resource. I hate hearing this when students are taking Algebra 2 and their facilitator is an English certified teacher. There's something to me that's wrong with that picture. Now, I know that there's a big conversation that we could have about that, but I think it's very important to have that content area certified teacher who is the one driving the course, the person that the student can talk to if they have questions about the content. Because with that content area certified person, you can truly add that high quality feedback to those assignments that students are submitting to really help ensure that they are learning what they need to as they are completing those online courses. Now, the other thing that I emphasize to our instructors is I don't ever want to hear feedback from a student or from a parent that says, well, my teacher said they had another job somewhere else and that they were just going to have to wait till I got done with that. Okay. I don't ever want students to feel like because they are doing virtual that they're coming in second place, because this is their school. This is what they are completing, and it is important for them to feel just as important as a student who is attending a traditional face-to-face classroom. So if that means that you're having to think outside the box as far as your staff structure, then please do that so that students do not feel like that they are coming into second place. The other thing that I'll kind of talk about, we do currently use Florida Virtual School as our curriculum provider. We've used them for almost a decade now. We've used them in a couple of different capacities where we've looked at content provider, teachers, and then we've shifted to a model where we actually employ our own instructors. Kentucky certified, we have 45 part-time instructors, 2 full-time instructors. But here's the one thing that I want to say about curriculum. Obviously, you can talk to us about our experience with the Florida Virtual School curriculum, but I'm not telling you that that's what's going to fit for your program. You have to look through the different content providers and see what is my vision and which content provider best aligns with that. The other thing to remember is when you are purchasing a ready-made packaged curriculum, please deliver it the way that it is designed to be delivered. If there are synchronous components that are built into those courses, you have to deliver that course in the way that it's designed to be delivered, or students are going to miss out on something from those courses. Now, the other side of that is, there are definitely advantages to looking at different content providers and looking at what best meets the needs of your students. But know that it is okay to start small, right? It's okay for you to just start with a handful of students. You don't have to be at the capacity that Bavel is in your first year, because when you are starting small, you're really allowing yourself to grow your model and to truly put the infrastructures plural, infrastructures in place that are going to create the most successful learning opportunities for your students. So I know that we're running short on time. Again, we could continue this conversation for days, but I know that we're going to have some time for additional questions. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Philip. I do have a few questions, and one, just very quickly, do you still charge the fee, the $300 fee to students who qualify for free and reduced lunch?
Yes, we do. We do, because they will get it back.
Okay, great. Thank you. Also, I have a question. If students are enrolled not completing their work, do you allow them to stay in the program, or you move them out? And do you supply the technology, a Chromebook or whatever technology is needed?
Let me start with the students who aren't completing their coursework. Okay, so we have a tier system in place. Progress reports are sent out to all of our stakeholders, students, parents. If we're working with a school one-on-one, to that school contact, so that students get progress reports every 2 weeks. And we have a script that we run on those progress reports in-house to identify those students who are falling behind. If they appear on that list, then they're required to have a one-on-one conversation with our counselor to talk about what's going on. And sometimes it's just a conversation for that student to just unload on the personal things that are going on in their life, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be completely academic based, but I think if we can start to address those personal issues that are going on, just having that conversation with an individual helps us to start developing those goals for them to get back in their courses. And sometimes it may mean, okay, there is a lot going on. You need to take 2 or 3 days off, right? But we've got a plan in place that's going to get you caught up and help you still finish your courses by the end of the year. Now, there have been very few situations where we've actually, quote unquote, kicked a student out of our program, right? But I think when there have been students that have exited our program because of them not working, honestly, the parent and the student have kind of come to that realization of, oh, this isn't working for me. But for us, we can go back to those procedures, those expectations that we have in place and say, we have done this, we have done this, we have done this, and it's still not been successful. As long as we have that documentation trail of this is why it's not working, then I think that helps us to present a better case to parents and students when we say, okay, we need to start looking at other options. This just isn't working.
All right. Anything else to add, Deneen, to that?
Well, I just always tell my kids and parents, communicate, communicate, communicate. As long as you communicate, I can help you. It's when I don't hear from you, I don't know where you are and why you're not working, that I really don't know how to help you. And so much like Philip, as long as we can meet with them and their parent, so many circumstances, so many life things going on, we will help you to get caught up, but you have to communicate with us.
Robert?
Yeah, pretty well along the same lines. It's about communication, about making sure that we stay in touch with that student and that we are constantly monitoring what they're doing. Our process here is if that content area teacher will tell me that there's somebody that's not making progress, then I'll make contact with them. If it's to a point where they do not start working at that point, then I will set an individual goal for that student. You're going to have this much done by this date. Then if they don't do it by that date, I actually have the student come to school. We have a classroom here at our Eagle Academy that they will sit in and do their work. So they'll be required to come to the building physically for a few days to get caught back up. And just like was mentioned before, we've had very few instances, really only one instance that I can think of where I have moved someone from our program back into the regular school because they weren't able to ever get up to pace. But usually it's just like with any other behavior, it becomes behavior management at that point. Once the students realize that, hey, somebody is watching me, somebody is making sure that I get this done, then eventually they will catch up. Now, I have had several instances where I've had to make them come to school and sit down and do it, but they do eventually get to it.
Okay, are the teachers in your all schools, says the question is, are the teachers at the high school, middle school acting as facilitators for the virtual students? Do these teachers have extra planning or time to accommodate the in-person and virtual students?
Andy, I'll go ahead and take that one first if that's okay.
Okay, fine.
Yeah, my high school teachers are provided with an extra planning period during the day that's devoted to their virtual learning class. So it's just like another class that they teach during that time period. During the day is when they make their contacts with students and when students have access to them. So I'm able to give those students a pointed time when they can expect communication back from that teacher, or they can actually contact that teacher. That teacher has their classroom open at that time. So if the student wants to come in, they can come in and sit down with them. Also, we're pretty fortunate in Johnson County. We have our Eagle Enrichment Program. It's an ESS program it's grant funded, and it operates it operates before school and after school. So there's a before school program and after school program, and our kids all have access to that program also. Throughout the pandemic, it's operated on Wednesdays. So on Wednesdays, the district is virtual learning, but that program is operating in person. So my virtual students, I've had several of them come and take advantage of that. We have different tutors, different places that are available during that time. But yes, my high school teachers are granted an extra planning period. Middle school teachers work it into their days. So some of them have some time that they have PLC planning or group planning and things like that. So they use that time.
Okay, we're basically out of time. Philip, Deneen, anything you want to add very quickly?
I just wanted to say my teacher facilitator is my virtual learning lab teacher. So he has students in the building with him every period of the day, and he also facilitates our Rave classes. And then my content specialists hold office hours after school, and they are paid additionally for that.
Fantastic. Philip, anything?
So we have a combination of all the above. We have some full-time teachers that are their sole responsibility is Babel. For our part-time teachers, that is outside of their other responsibilities throughout the school day. We also have some retired teachers that are delivering some courses from us. And I caution you there because there's a lot of work that we've had to do with KTRS and how all of that works together. But we do have some teachers in that capacity as well.
Thank you. Marty, Ben, anything you guys like to add?
I would just say that having that sustainable plan in place, and I know that everyone who's spoken, there's iterations every year to make sure that you have the right supports. We want to make sure that we do have non-examples of where folks have not found success because maybe one individual teacher is overloaded with more students than they can handle. We also know that, and I want to kind of say this and really push on it pretty hard. Having a teacher teach full-time to live students in person at the same time that they're trying to teach and attend to students remote or virtual is one of the most difficult things to ever try to do. Yeah. So we want to try to design for other options than that as much as we can. Now we know that there are some one-offs or some touch points that students can tune in remotely if possible. That shouldn't be the plan for this kind of implementation. And then the final thing I'll say is all the other panelists pushed on what we're talking about is multi-tiered systems of support, and making sure that we have that in place and attend to and say that just because a student is a full-time enrolled virtual student, we don't see them in person, they still plug into that multi-tiered systems of support. That is vital for us, and to have a plan for that for our students who are with us and they learn with us, they're just not physically stepping on campus. Thanks.
Great. Ben, very quickly.
I would just say this. I love talking with this group, Philip, Deneen, Robert, and here's why, because over and over and over, the common theme through all of this was we're going to do whatever it takes for students to succeed. And that's what I love about this group. So as you are planning your academies, your programs, guys, I'll always fall back on Todd Whitaker's statement that it's people, not programs, right? Online virtual learning is certainly a program that can work if you tag it with the right people. So that will largely dictate your success for students and your program this coming year. And you're talking to 3 programs that are full of people that make it happen no matter what it really takes. And I love them for it. I thank them for it. And that will be your biggest design piece moving forward as you guys attack 21, 22 and beyond. Thank you guys for having us.
Wonderful. Again, I'd like to, thank the leaders at KEDC and their support for helping us put this together. My colleague, Letitia Sparks, who was amazing through this process, and our panel. You guys were great. I think you shared a lot of information to our districts, and to the members of our districts that are currently still online. Feel free to contact us with questions. I have my email in the chat box. Feel free to contact me with any follow-up questions. And this is a great group here. We'll be glad to forward those questions. So again, thank you. Wonderful meeting, and have a great rest of the day.